Hi, I'm Thomas Kochev. I'm here with Steve Smith. We are your hosts for the 2017 Ojai broadcast, coming to you live from here in Libbey Bowl in the beautiful Ojai, California. We just played for you a series of daybreak concerts, one from last year and one from this year. And the early morning concerts and the late night concerts is kind of a special feature here at Ojai. I mean, you've been here for a day or two now, and this kind of 24-hour kind of feel to the festival is kind of in the blood.
It's remarkable. It's immersive. It's exhilarating. And the thing is, even when the sets end, you know, the music, the art doesn't end. The conversations that happen all over the lawn. I'm pointing as if you can see it, but trust me, there's a beautiful lawn out here, and people talk to each other, and you can tell how fired up and engaged they are by what they've heard and how much they want to share it with somebody else. It's a brilliant communal experience.
Absolutely. Specifically, I remember 2 years ago on Steve Schick's year as artistic director, he performed a 5 a.m. concert, perhaps the earliest concert we've ever had at Ojai. It was Morton Feldman's for Philip Guston, and it started at 5 a.m. It went for about 4 hours.
Right,
a hefty work, and I think, kudos to him.
Oh, I mean, my gosh, anybody who takes on those works to begin with is something of a champion, but to do it that early in the morning, and tell me, you didn't have to host that one, did you?
No, I was not here. What you mentioned about this idea of community and Ojai, what's really cool is back there on the lawn, they have an area set out for the artists and the audience to intermingle at the end of each concert. So you really do feel this sense of community where you can talk to the artists right when they finish playing.
The green room that's literally green because it's out there on that gorgeous lawn. It's a brilliant idea, and it breaks down those barriers. You don't feel like, okay, the artists are these untouchable entities that are up on stage. They're people like you and me, and we can have conversations, share ideas, and they gain from the experience as well.
Absolutely. It is so much fun, and I always get the sense that every year, from sitting in this booth, but just from in my breaks, you can see, Vijay this year walking the lawn, and last year Peter Sellers walking the lawn, and you want to talk to them, you want to interact with them. That's welcomed here. It's so cool.
And of course, there's also the installation over towards the
Right.
gazebo, Rio Negro 2 by Douglas Repetto, Douglas Ewart, and George Lewis. And that's extraordinary. I mean, what a brilliant combination of a sort of traditional elements that's based on rain sticks, but they're automated and synchronized so that they're not quite happening together, and then serendipitously they'll come together and go apart. And you can just spend a good amount of time standing among those kinetic sculptures and really just experiencing a sense of place that's quite extraordinary.
And I guess our point is, you got to get here
Right.
to be a part of all this. I know you guys are enjoying it from home, but it's something special here. And if you ever have the chance to come out to Ojai, it's really awesome.
It's truly extraordinary. People were trying to convince me to come out here, and I wanted to for the longest time. This is my maiden voyage, and I can't imagine it'll be the last time. It's really, really something special here.
Just so I don't leave you all hanging on what you just heard, first we heard Jen Shu's Solo Rites and 7 Breaths, which performed live this morning at 9 a.m. And if you caught that, really, you would be taken back by just her amazing artistry. And this is a one-woman monodrama, amazing production. I don't know how to describe it. She plays 12 instruments in it. She sings in 7 languages. She is acting. She is dancing. I mean, I don't know what else you want from one person.
Well, it surprised me when you did the interview with her where she said that she had never thought of herself as being a very good storyteller, because you're watching this and you think she's a magnificent storyteller.
Absolutely. And, I guess we've talked about this before, but she is really almost par for the course for Ojai as far as bringing in these artists who do everything, literally. Being a composer-performer is absolutely normal here, and also playing 5 instruments, normal as well.
Sure, of course, absolutely.
And, speaking of multi-dimensional artists, we cut you off just now, but that was a piece by Caroline Shaw from last year, By and By, with Devon Tynes as the soloist. On that same concert, you heard Leila Adu's If the Stars Align and Christine Southworth's Honey Flyers. Leila Adu is a Princeton composer, and last year she was featured here. She was not only had her music performed by Calder Quartet, but also took the stage at nighttime and performed, I don't know how to describe it really, but I'd say almost some sort of version of salon music for piano and singing. Like she sang, and somewhere between cabaret meets modern jazz meets contemporary, kind of like this year where there's no words to describe what they're doing.
Right. Well, and Christine Southworth similarly is a very multi-dimensional artist based at MIT, and in addition to being a composer and a performer, she's literally a multimedia artist, does a great deal of work in video, collaborates frequently with her partner Evan Ziporin, who is also at MIT. So again, somebody who is not just limited to one title or one caption or one genre, but virtually a community unto themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, every year I come here and I know I'm talking about with my friends and colleagues at home what the program is. And they always say, what kind of music is it? Right. And I'm like, well, it's a lot of this and it's a lot of that. And the bottom line is you just have to hear it and experience this music to know what it is.
Right. And then all of these different people and all of these different styles and ideas implanted upon arguably one of the most venerable institutions that classical music has developed, the string quartet, through the imagination and the vision of the Calder Quartet, which is a Los Angeles group formed at UCLA, named after the sculptor Alexander Calder. So immediately you have this sense of kinetic worlds in motion and so on. And they're a tremendous group whose discography ranges from Mozart to Terry Riley to Christopher Rouse. And speaking of 5-hour Morton Feldman pieces, in November, they became one of the handful of string quartets in the world that has played his 6-hour string quartet number 2.
So a short one.
Right, exactly. A bagatelle.
Calder Quartet, for those of you who know the festival, are longtime friends here. They've come many, many years, and their just sense of adventurousness and programming and on playing, you just see it every year. It's amazing. Have you seen many of their concerts live?
I've not seen the Calder Quartet as often as I've liked, but I've seen them a couple of times, and they're always tremendously compelling, whether they're playing contemporary music or whether they're invigorating music from the classical canon.
Absolutely. So, to go forward, tonight we have 2 very exciting concerts. The first one is, the 8 p.m. concert is George Lewis's opera Afterword. Now, you're very familiar with George Lewis and this opera, what it's about. What can we expect?
Well, I can't honestly tell you what to expect. I genuinely can't, and that's part of the thrill. But I can set it up for you. So George Lewis is one of the banner members of Chicago's AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Music. This is a very, very important and compelling revolutionary collective that formed among black musicians in Chicago in 1965. Several of the founders and proponents are here partaking in this festival. And George joined the AACM as a teenager in 1971. So he's somebody for whom the AACM is in his blood. And when it came time for somebody to tell the story of the AACM definitively, George was the one to do it. And his book came out in 2007 titled A Power Stronger Than Itself, the AACM and American Experimental Music. Now, this is a 728-page book, and for most of it, it is a very, very, very diligent, rigorous, and compellingly readable history of the organization, its aspirations, its goals, and the way that it revolutionized not just musical style, but also community, politics, economics. It really had a dramatic change in Chicago, and then when the music began to seep out into the world through residencies in Paris, in New York City, in other places, literally this organization changed the face of American music and music around the world. So you have this book that tells tells the story. But then at the end, you have literally an afterword where George breaks from that rigor and that scholastic kind of approach and gets very fanciful, very poetic, very lyrical in his evocation of certain strands and themes that he's teased out through the book. So Afterword, the opera, is actually an adaptation of Afterword from this book. So it deals with these historic characters, as I said, some of whom are participating in this very festival. So I have no idea how it's going to be on stage, but I am thrilled for the opportunity to find out.
Yeah, I absolutely cannot wait. And, George's music has already been featured here at the festival.
That's correct.
One cool aspect of this year is these ICE pop-up concerts.
Right.
ICE being the ensemble in residence. And about 100 yards back in the park, they're doing these kind of interactive pieces. And one of them was George Lewis's Emergent from 2014, which Claire Chase opened up the entire festival with.
Right.
Were you there for the performance of that?
Yes, absolutely. And it's I think the second or third time that I've heard Claire play that piece. It's never exactly the same twice because the energy and spirit that she brings to it is always fresh and original. But it's basically, it's a virtual community of Claire's because a lot of the other sounds are derived from her and the sound is dispersed around her. The sound engineer and electronic music expert Levi Lorenzo is interacting with her. George is, among all of his other qualities, including being a world-class trombonist, he is a tremendous expert in developing software that's sort of intuitive and can improvise along with live musicians. So he is a pioneer in that field and continuing to push the envelope. So that was yesterday's Gazebo concert. And then today...
Yeah, today we had Anthony Braxton's composition number 263, and Anthony Braxton, another composer in the AACM.
Right. One of the major figures,
just revolutionary personality and what he did in all fields of music for contemporary and for jazz. And the way to best describe how this piece kind of goes is that he's written some 300 plus compositions that all interconnect and can be played in any combination based on the way the scores are laid out and based on instructions, whether you improvise here or whether you go to a different composition there, and kind of almost giving the performers all the tools they can have, or musical tools, to make the piece, but then they all do it live and every time it is different.
Right, exactly. And so you had a number of sub-compositions within the major envelope of the composition. And this was an example of a strand of his composition called Ghost Trance Music, which is literally about ritualistic impulses. And it is there's a very, very regular pulse that goes through a lot of the music, so it's supposed to kind of engage you in a trance, but then other little splinter groups sort of break off and do their own thing. And it's kind of like a model for democracy almost. It's seeing musicians interacting in disparate ways in real time, and yet there's a harmonious blend to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly awesome. And so, as you can see behind me, the people are streaming in, and behind the camera, they're filling up on the lawn. And you must have heard the bells going off. We are getting ready right now for the Ojai Talks with Ara Guzelimian. Oh my goodness.
Ara Guzelimian.
Ara Guzelimian.
He is the provost and dean of the Juilliard School. He is, in fact, a past artistic director of the Ojai Music Festival. Other of his accolades include associations with the Aspen Music Festival and with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He is also, and I say this with great envy in my voice, one of the great raconteurs and interviewers that I've ever watched in action. He did 2 talks yesterday, one with Vijay Iyer, and then another with Vijay Iyer, Wadada Leo Smith, and Steve Schick. And they were both absolutely riveting, and he teased out exactly the right things from all of his guests and really kept the thing flowing. So I'm thrilled to hear what he's going to do tonight with this special blue ribbon panel. He's got George Lewis, the composer of tonight's opera. He's got Muhal Richard Abrams, who is one of the founders of the AACM, just a colossal figurehead in Chicago music and in American music. He's got Roscoe Mitchell, another early member of the AACM and founder of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, and then 2 younger representatives to talk about the impact of the AACM. Tyshawn Sorey, the drummer, composer, conductor, etc. extraordinaire that we've seen several times in this festival, and Claire Chase, the flutist and founder of the International Contemporary Ensemble.
Yeah, these Ojai Talks are kind of a cornerstone here at the festival, and they really give you insight onto what you're going to hear on the whole festival, but mostly for tonight, especially so, because they're going to talk about this group, and then you're going to watch the opera immediately afterwards. So we're taking you to the stage right now for the Ojai Talks. Do enjoy.
And are we terrific? Yep. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is such an dizzyingly wonderful joy and honor to be with this assemblage of extraordinary musicians. George Lewis, Muhal Richard Abrams, Roscoe Mitchell, Tyshawn Sorey, and Claire Chase. And before we start on the topic tonight, which is the AACM, which we'll focus on, I just wanted to take a minute and just again shout out and acknowledge the astonishing, moving, remarkable performances that Claire Chase and Tyshawn Sorey gave last night and this afternoon. The AACM is one of the richest veins, rivers, streams of American music and American cultural life at its very best, and this is a moment to be reminded of American culture at its very best. And it stands for the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. It was founded in Chicago in 1965. It is happily going strong with chapters around the country, and of course a presence and a school as well. And it has involved some of the most creative musicians of the past 50 and 60 years, and also had a profound influence on succeeding generations of musicians. Vijay Iyer talked yesterday about the importance of the AACM and work with some of these musicians individually as helping him find his path. And there are many, many others who testify to the same thing. Muhal Richard Abrams was one of the 4 co-founders, so he really was there from the very beginning. And if you don't mind, let's begin at the very beginning. What prompted the creation for you and your fellow collective members to start it?
I think you characterize us as an American stream of creation, what you know, something that you said earlier when you started. An American stream of consciousness. I think the AACM was just a human stream of consciousness. You drop the pebble in the water. Who knows who dropped the pebble? But there's these individual streams or lines, or whatever you want to call it, trajectories, that result from this pebble being dropped in the water. Who dropped the pebble? I think the inspirer of individualism dropped the pedal. That human part of us that calls for us to look at our basics. And one of our glaring basics is the fact that none of us are alike. None of us are alike. So, we have many examples of individual pursuits that enlighten all of us, either with the light or with darkness. So, when you speak about the AACM, I like to think of it in that way, and many other ways. The AACM, I guess, came about because people, well, first of all, for myself, I started to think in terms of what I'd like to do as an individual. And there was no real forum outlet or consistent outlet that was available. I, for the most part, during my earlier times, I played and enjoyed quite a bit of what you would call mainstream jazz. But I always had a desire to find out about things that weren't being done in that way. Things within myself that I wanted to see done in some other way as an individual. And to bring it together here in answer to your question, I encountered some spirits who happen to feel the same way. It's true. And I had an experimental band, a band I call the experimental band, which Roscoe Mitchell was one of the members of it, the first experimental band, Joseph Jarman. And they were young, much younger than I was, and but their spirit was like they wanted to do something that was called for within their own being. So I organized the experimental band, and we would rehearse and write our own music and present our own music. We had a place where we would present the music. And so by and by, 3 other musicians, Philip Coran, Steve McCall, and Jody Christian, came to me and they said, why don't we organize a larger group to do these things that you're doing? And let's call a meeting of all the jazz musicians in Chicago, at least on the south side where we were. And I say, great, let's do that. So we called a meeting to see who among those musicians had a need to express their individualism in a way that was truly individual, in the sense that they would bring their own real thoughts that weren't heretofore known by anyone else but themselves. So anyway, there were people who adhered to it, and there were people who didn't adhere to it. So the group that would come forward as the AACM sort of cut itself out of the crowd. And from there, we proceeded. That's it.
And I'd love to ask you, since your view and your perspective goes back to the very beginning, how it looks to you 52 years later, now that there are also succeeding generations who've joined, who've been inspired, not only the musicians here on stage, Nicole Mitchell, who will be playing tomorrow, and many, many, many others. How does your original instinct and your impulse look 52 years later? Is it doing the things the 4 of you hoped it would?
I think you misunderstood me. You misunderstood me. Now, I don't mean, I know you're well-meaning. I don't mean it that way. In the sense, I wasn't expecting anything. I can't speak on anything like that because I wasn't expecting anything. I just sort of enjoyed the atmosphere of people creating. You know what I mean? And it has continued, and it continued because of what it is. I had no, well, actually, I can't even speak in those terms, you know, I mean, it's what it is. I think it's, was it Norman Mailer? Well, there was a TV show the other day, and I think it was the producer of Good Times and all that guy. And so they asked him about Gloria Stapleton, who played All in the Family, you know, played the wife and the All in the Family. So he asked, he said, how was she? He said, she was always what she was. That's what he told him. She was always what she was. Her creative self, you know what I mean? So.
And I'd love to ask both Roscoe Mitchell and George Lewis in turn about how AACM came into your life, and how, what role it's played, how it's helped form you, and how it's helped come, whatever came after or during.
Well, for me, it came at the right time, you know, for me. When I got back to Chicago, the experimental band was already in place. And I would consider that most people were further ahead than I was. At that time, I was totally interested in playing conventional jazz. But then I came down to the experimental band and met Muhal. And I saw what he just described, you know, a band that met every Monday night, rehearsing composition by members of the band. People were encouraged to write music for the band, bring it back, have it played. If it wasn't quite what you wanted, take it back and rework it. So that you get it to where you like it. And then Muhal encouraged me to write music, because I wasn't really writing that much music then. He said, listen, some of that stuff you're playing on your horn, just write that, you know. And and I understood that another thing was the philosophies that, you know, we need to be in control over our own destinies and so on, you know. So there's lots of different lessons in there. Write your own music. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means you write your own music, and then in the end, when it's time to get royalties and stuff, you get it. Not other people, you know. And what it has turned out to me is it's family, you know. If Muhal and I get together and haven't been together for a long time, we just pick up from where we left off, you know. We get together, we were at Stanford, you know. We get together, we go over and get ourselves these keys so we can get into the practice rooms. We have our breakfast, we get up, we go to our practice rooms, and we start working on music, you know. If we're somewhere where there's a nice art exhibit going on, we go there and we see that, you know. We used to carry like sketch pads with us wherever we went, and we'd be sketching, or we would just be a total, it would be a total workshop of learning from every aspect. Muhal never got tired of us coming over to his house after we got out of school, and we'd go over to his house directly from school, and we'd be there until bedtime, you know. And then, and what amazed me about Muhal, he put up with us. And at the end of the week, when it was time for the rehearsal, he'd walk in there with a brand new piece for the band, you know? There were so many great lessons there for me, and I carried that forward, like with my students. I mean, I follow the rules of the AACM. You know, when I left there and went to Michigan, I organized the CAC, the Creative Artists Collective, and it's all ongoing. I mean, I'm amazed when I stop to think that like 2015 was the 50th anniversary of the AACM. Yeah. So, yeah, and if you'd have told me a long time ago, well, you know what, this thing never stops, I may not have believed you, but now I see that it doesn't, you know. For me, I think maybe a few more lifetimes, and then maybe I'd be able to accomplish some of the things I would like to accomplish in music.
George, how did you first encounter AACM, and what role has it played in your life?
Well, can you hear me? I was a 19-year-old waif in 1971, and Muhal and Roscoe and several other people took me in, and they're still taking me in. So that's the short answer to that. When I got there, I had no idea what to expect. And they said, well, you should come to the Saturday classes. So I came to the Saturday classes. Now, I just sort of dropped out of Yale for a while. So I went to the Saturday classes, and Muhal was at the blackboard drawing these, sets of, they look like cantus firmus kind of structures, and he would draw those, and he would give you some rules as to how to use these and how to concatenate them, how to recombine them, and then he'd say, "Well, that's it. Go home and write a composition and bring it back next week." I said, "Oh, really? Wow. You mean like?" So I did that, and that's what made me realize that. I guess when I came along, this was that business that Roscoe said about writing your own music. I mean, the AACM for me was a composer-centered organization. Those were the first composition lessons I had ever had. And in many ways, they were critical to my development as a composer being someone who, you know, writes music, whatever that means, or creates music. And in this case, a lot of the music was based around scores. The scores were very complicated. People taught themselves to do incredible things, things that were well out. By the time I was there, just 1965 to 71, this incredible period of development had happened where there were music and sounds and intermedia and all kinds of things that were well outside of the tradition that you guys were talking about. These guys didn't do those kinds of things. I don't remember hearing anything about traditional jazz. I guess they had left, So I came in and I just accepted what was there because it was what I was really interested in, and I was learning from it, but also extremely naive about it. And finding out later that this was part of a larger stream of experimental music, it was just the place where I really needed to be,
I will also say that George's role within the AACM has also been as its chronicler in a really extraordinary book called A Power Stronger Than Itself, which is both scholarly book and cultural history and a very musical book, but more than anything else, it's quite a musical book. You allow a lot of counterpoint in your book, and it's, I read it in very musical terms. Muhal.
Oh, I wanted to say something. I thought about it while George was speaking. Now, we did have a rule, one rule, and it's important, and you'll hear a lot of it expressed in this evening's program, in terms of narrative. And that narrative was you had to do your own music. No other music except yours. That was a rule within the AACM. When I spoke about the one group carving itself out from a larger group and becoming the AACM, well, that was the bone of contention. Whether who wanted to go forward in a group that within the group expressed only their own music. It was not against the other because there were many forums for the expression of mainstream things. So we separated it out. So that was the one rule, and I just wanted to mention that. And it wasn't a rule, it was just an agreement. You know what I mean? It was an agreement. All who agree that they want to be in a group that expresses just original composition, then we go forward over here. And that was quite a bit before the name was concocted, you might say. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So for many reasons, but also for one great reason, like the AACM, I think, is an example of something. And adhering to your aspirations, independent of interference or influence from things around you. You respect the things around you, but you also have to take the time that you need to do what you have to do. So any young people out here that are looking around for things to do for themselves, you know what I mean? Get on your own stuff if that's how you feel, and stay on it.
Well, maybe that's the best moment to ask Claire and Tyshawn, as musicians who've, I won't say influenced by, but have admired and perhaps influenced by what role the model of the AACM has played in your own lives and your own musical development and your own musical identity. Tyshawn, you want to take it first?
One of the biggest things that I've learned from the organization was the idea of self-determination and the idea of doing for self, as George has talked about in a couple of accounts I've read that discussed the work of the AACM, as well as just basically the needs to address things that are important to you, you know, as a composer, both as a composer and as a performer. And the idea of really, you know, of really putting yourself on the line. I mean, really putting yourself out there musically and all, and really just pursuing your interests with the largest degree of conviction and necessity. All of these things have played a huge role in terms of what I've wanted to do in my own work, and also with what I wanted to, you know, the way with which I wanted to pursue doing my own work. And all of these things, I mean, the idea of self-determination was definitely one of the biggest factors in why I've chose the path I've chosen as a composer and as a performer. Not necessarily thinking about the idea of genre or thinking about the idea of, you know, I don't know, like, how am I going to get favorable press or how am I going to do any of this stuff? I mean, once I've got rid of those concerns and really started to pay more attention to what exactly I was interested in pursuing as a composer and a performer, then I was able to better focus my energy on my own work. And I was able to, as a result of that, also grow and get into opportunities that, perhaps I otherwise might not have ended up pursuing were it not for the determination to go about pursuing that. So, and as an African-American composer especially, this is important. Just coming out of an economically depressed neighborhood where I've grown up, it was always the thing to kind of, like if you didn't necessarily fit within the social structure of whatever, of the neighborhood which you grew up in, you sort of ostracized. And I didn't let that bother me, because, from the get-go, self-determination was always there, but what the AACM has done for me, and in terms of my understanding of its history, and also the influence that I was able to experience from all of these members, all of whom I've collaborated with and others, what I was able to do was, even though self-determination was there from the get-go, this actually helped my understanding about this organization and also its history and also its social importance played a vital role in strengthening that belief, and strengthening my confidence to really go for it and to really, pursue whatever it is I wanted to do, no matter what obstacles would present themselves. And so I'm grateful to all of these gentlemen and all of the other members of the AACM for really paving the way for people like myself, for younger musicians like myself, younger musician composers like myself, to really stick to it and really stick to the path that you want to stick to, and keep pursuing your own goals in your own music. Even if there's only one person who believes in your work, you have to feel like when you're doing your work, you have to feel like you have to feel this feeling of aliveness when it comes to your own work. You have to do the work to. For me, I couldn't. I wouldn't want to be alive if I couldn't do my own work, and that's just my feelings about that. So the self-determination part of that is, all of that was what spurred this belief into really pursuing whatever it is I wanted to pursue. And so I'm very thankful for all of that and how important that is for me.
Claire?
It's beautifully said, Tyshawn. I'll answer your question, but as I was listening to you say that so beautifully, I am reminded of something you said on your very first rehearsal with ICE, when we'd commissioned you for an ICE Lab piece. This was back in 2010 or 11, I think, and Tyshawn sat down with the group of ICE musicians that he was going to work with over the course of a year to create a new piece together. And you said, I'm not interested in making something that melds different practices, classical music, experimental music, creative music, jazz, improvisation, notated music, on and on. And he said, I'm not interested in that at all. I want to make something with you from a place which we're going to start right now, at which all of those lines have disappeared completely. Are you in? And everyone was like, yeah, let's do this. And that's what you do, and that's also the tradition that has been passed down to us by these magicians that we're sharing the stage with. For ICE and for me, the AACM was a huge inspiration in the early days. And I think that this is true of our entire generation, whether they're conscious of it or not. This is both the privilege and the curse of being a musician, right? That we end up with all of these musics and all of these histories and musical philosophies and also organizational philosophies in our musical bloodstreams. But we don't always know where they come from unless we get curious about giving credit where credit is due. And in ICE's case, when we were undergrads at Oberlin, I discovered Anthony Braxton's 1978 solo Cone album, and I just thought that was the craziest, most beautiful, weirdest, and most affecting thing I'd ever heard, and was like, how do I make music like that? And I found a bunch of misfits at Oberlin that were interested in the same kind of stuff, and from there we discovered George's work, and we discovered Roscoe's work, and Muhal's work, and then we discovered what this organization was about. And I remember reading to a group of who would become then ICE members, I think it was in the original charter, the mission statement. You correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I read this so many times that I remember that the organization was dedicated to nurturing, performing, and nurturing, performing, and recording original and serious music, right? Yeah. And there's so many things to unpack about that, right? I mean, using the gerund, like this is music, these are actions that are happening and evolving as we speak, but also choosing nurturing as the first thing in a mission statement, and composing and performing and recording. That was a before and after moment in my thinking about what an organization of musicians could do together, what we could do for each other, what we could do if we took total responsibility for the terms on which we were making that music, and total responsibility for who this music is reaching, where it comes from, how it's evolving, and what we do with it once it's out there, how it continues to change. And I can't imagine the ICE idea, let alone the ICE project and ICE, the organization, without this half a century of history that was before us.
Original serious music. Was that the wording?
That was one of the wordings.
Original serious music.
They published, you guys published an ad in the Chicago Defender, the African-American paper, which talked about recording original and serious new compositions for the general public and so on. And then later there was a set of 9 purposes which I couldn't recite verbatim, but which come down to creating an atmosphere in which serious musicians, creative musicians can come together. Now, the thing is, Ara, I think sometimes people don't get why this was really necessary. You want to create something, just go out there and create it. Why do you have to have an organization and all these kinds of things? Well, it turns out that, art, music comes from organizations of people who come together to make things happen, starting with the people who made Ojai Festival happen. You can see that right now. So, and I think a lot of the structures that were taken for granted by people from majority communities were not available to the people that started the AACM for various reasons, which we could go into, and I think a lot of you know why. But the thing is that because of that, my feeling has always been, well, first of all, we have to come together to find out what we have in common. That's a more or less direct quote from something Muhal said quite a long time ago. And then for me, it's a matter of, you found the choir, there's nothing wrong with preaching to it, because that's how you build up the organization. You build people, you find out who's with me, you discover that you do have things in common, and on that basis you can create and you can resist and you can create new structures to replace the ones that perhaps you've been denied access to. And so when you think about it like that, that's a different model, a collective model of how art is made, which stands against the myth of the artist garret with someone shaking their fist to the cosmos, really.
I want to correct something. I'd like to correct something. We never used the word serious. Someone paraphrased, or whatever they did, whoever wrote that out, we never used that word. That word appears to be quite opinionated. Yes. We never used a word like that. We said original music. We never used the word serious. That was very painful to hear that. It was, because we don't have any opinion as to what people should write in terms of the content. They produce what they want to produce, and certainly, please, except from me, we never use the word serious or any word of that type. Thank you.
Duly noted.
Well, and that touches on a hugely important subject, which is you've also now had 50 years of people trying to label and categorize, and original music bypasses that impulse to label and categorize, which I think is one of the most liberating things about AACM.
But I think it's important that people get involved, even in that kind of dialogue. After all, now, why is it getting their attention? There's something that touched them. They may be speaking in the negative, but they're talking about it. Why? You see, so the dialogue is fine, and the attempts to categorize and whatnot like that was going on before the AACM, you know what I mean? Duke Ellington didn't really care for the word jazz, and a whole lot of musicians like that didn't care for the word jazz because it didn't describe anything, because what they were doing didn't need description. It needed acceptance as, well, an art form. We'll just put it that way. That's a poor level to speak of it when you say art form, and I will tell you about that, but we don't have time. Nothing against the words, but I'm saying, you know, if Tyshawn says, this is corn on the cob, it'd be better to take that than some caption as to what he's playing. Or if Roscoe says, let's all jump up, there it is, take that. Anyway, thank you.
What we're about to see tonight in about 20 minutes is a remarkable piece that's an opera that George has written that takes as its basis the final chapter of the book, Power Stronger Than Itself, which is very directly a counterpoint of voices. It's a very beautiful closing chapter in which so many voices are just allowed to sound. And sound in conjunction with each other. And I thought as our last thing before we turn the stage over to the opera was just to ask you about how this piece came about, because on some level it's an unlikely project to turn a chapter of a book and a history into an opera. So tell us about the genesis.
Well, I'm glad you noticed that. Academic writing, you know, normally it should just stay academic. But at least my academic writing should. But then, you know, Sean Griffin, the director, read this, and including the penultimate chapter, the Afterword chapter, and also Jim Chandler, who's director of the Franke Institute for the Humanities at the University of Chicago, and thought, well, this could be the basis for an opera or theater. I said, are you kidding? You know? But then you started to think about like those voices, you know? I mean, first of all, what the voices in this opera are talking about includes everything we've talked about so far on the stage. Originality, self-determination, lack of interest in genre markers, all those things are included here. People saying, well, we're looking for individualism, we're looking for originality. And part of the reason for that is because the operatic voices, the libretto itself, is more or less drawn from interviews I made with Muhal Richard Abrams, Roscoe Mitchell, and about 98 other people, but also the tapes that Muhal had audio tapes of the early AACM meetings. So at one point in one of the scenes is basically a staging of what happened in that meeting, you know, sort of, and you hear a lot of the same debates and themes. You know, I could give you a concordance if you like. I know who said what. But it comes down to that really these You could think of this as being different people debating their own future, or you could think of it as all the voices on stage being a single person debating his or her own future. We took one scene directly, the Amina Claudine Myers, the Ariae scene, which you'll see in the second act, comes directly from a narrative that she wrote. So what happens here is that giving people, or really revoicing and recombining, I'm not a creative writer, so I basically try to recombine what I find, and it's sort of like, what would you call it, sampling in a way. And I do a lot of it. I've been doing it for many years through sort of ethnographic methods. I found out that ethnographic art wasn't a nice way to describe it. People didn't like that. But there is an ethnographic component, and it comes from the marriage of scholarship and creative practice in a way telling us that scholarship is a creative practice. So you'll hear everything we talked about, the avatars, not characters, the avatars in the opera we'll discuss. And the final thing I'd like to say about it is that there's nothing, there should be, well, the AACM succeeds in this opera. It's not a tragedy. They win. They come from nothing and they win.
And on Sunday, you will have the privilege of seeing and hearing these three gentlemen play as a trio together, and the AACM keeps winning, and when the AACM keeps winning, we all keep winning. What a joy to be with Claire Chase, Tyshawn Sorey, and especially Roscoe Mitchell, Muhal Richard Abrams, and George Lewis. Thank you, gentlemen and lady.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Thanks very much. Wonderful.
You just heard the Ojai Talks, which gives you such great insight into the performances here at the festival. They do them every year. They do them sometimes multiple per year. And it gives you just inside track to what you're about to hear. And we're leading into, in about 10 minutes, George Lewis's opera Afterword. And I mean, what are your thoughts on the talk we just heard?
Rather extraordinary in terms of just, again, the opportunity to hear from some of the real architects of modern American music, unsung heroes of the experimental tradition whose ripples have been felt far beyond. It's just remarkable to get to hear them talking to one another and exchanging ideas and even sort of conflicting a little bit and setting the record straight. And we got to watch that happen in real time.
I loved it. And it was great to also hear Tyshawn Sorey and Claire Chase and how those legendary threes influence on them and what it's done for them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we're going to talk a bit about tomorrow's schedule and the amazing content we have lined up for you, and tease your interest so you'll come back tomorrow and tune in. Tomorrow afternoon, we're starting off with Brentano Quartet, and oh man, I love these guys. They're absolutely incredible, and they're going to be playing Vijay Iyer's Mozart effects. And this is a really, really cool project Brentano undertook a few years ago called the Fragments Project, and they took fragments of string quartets that already existed by composers like Bach and Haydn and Mozart that were incomplete, and then commissioned modern composers to finish them. They had Stephen Harkey, for example, finish Shostakovich's fragment. Goodbye Delina finished Bach's fragment. Yeah, Harbison finished a Haydn fragment. And then Vijay Iyer finished a Mozart fragment.
That's some heavy company there.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I feel like Vijay had the hardest task, because that's a really good fragment of Mozart wrote. And how you interact with it, it's really how he interacts with it, is really cool and worth tuning in for. On that same concert, they're playing Kurtag's Moments Musicaux, and for those of you who are Kurtag fans or know about Kurtag's music, perhaps the miniature specialist.
Right.
And this is no exception. This is 6 short movements for string quartet, and a lot of them taking influence and themes from Kurtag's Yatakuk, which is his games, which is 6 or 8 volumes now. He's got a lot of volumes of these, of short 30-second to 1-minute piano works. And the last bit of that concert is the Mozart Quartet in E-flat K428, which is nicknamed the Chromatic Quartet. And historically, when you hear this piece, it's going to sound like, is this Mozart? Because it's really pushing it.
Terrific.
Yeah, so it's a really cool concert, and you kind of see the history of the string quartet in a way.
Right.
And that leads us to the second half of that concert, is Tyshawn Sorey's Conduction, Autoschediasms for Creative Chamber Orchestra.
Now, I could not be more excited about this because it is a textbook example of a young artist taking up the example of an older experimental artist and really running with it, making it his own, but being honest to the impulse that formed it. This is Tyshawn's homage to Lawrence D. Butch Morris, who was a formidable figure, very much active in the New York music scene for decades. He passed away in 2013, but Butch Morris's specialty was the conduction, which is, exactly as it sounds, a conducted improvisation. Butch could bring together the most literally disparate musicians in the world. He could bring together heavy metal guitarists and classical string players and jazz improvisers and people who had training in oral traditions and people who had training in written traditions, put them all together, teach them a common set of symbols, and usually these were hand signals, gestures. He could hold up a board that had some little phrase on it, and they would spontaneously make music. And the first time that Tyshawn encountered one of these conductions was at the Bowery Poetry Club on the Lower East Side in 2002, and he said it just profoundly changed his life and made him feel that music is information, and it's information that can be shared by any players at any time under any circumstances, provided that there is sort of a common bond. And so that's what this conduction language is. So you will see Tyshawn on the podium actually giving gestures. I watched this. At one point he had 6 batons in his hand yesterday during rehearsal. So I could not be more thrilled about this particular performance.
And you're really going to have to tune in for that one because it will only be that way one time.
That's correct.
And it'll never be the same
Never
ever
exist again.
So you must tune in tomorrow for that one.
Right.
After that, we're going to have this really cool concert with Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in a chamber orchestra version for ice, paired with Roddy Rites of Holy by Vijay Iyer.
I mean, we're living at a time when the Rite of Spring has been taken over by the Bad Plus, a jazz piano trio, so perhaps nothing is shocking anymore, but the idea of an effective chamber scale reduction of one of the most famous and notorious ballet scores of the 20th century, a piece that literally changed the course of modern music. It's a thrilling prospect, and then pairing it together with Vijay Iyer's Radhe, which was very much a response to the Rite of Spring. The full title is Radhe, Rites of Holy, and it was a project that he put together with a very dear friend of his, the filmmaker Prashant Bhargava, who tragically passed away very suddenly at a very young age just 2 years ago. They were close friends, he and Vijay. And so this project is basically, it's based on the Indian rite of Holi, which is, for those of you who've seen in MasterCard commercials, perhaps, as Vijay cited just yesterday, the Indian celebration where colored powders are filling the air and everybody is getting saturated with these beautiful saffron colors and whatever. That's the rite of Holi, and it's an erotic encounter between the goddess Radha and Lord Krishna. So the film was made using Rite of Spring as the scratch track, and then that music was pulled out, and Vijay wrote entirely new music that sort of follows the emotional architecture of the Stravinsky while not echoing a single note.
That's going to be so cool.
Right.
Then we have Brentano Quartet, Round 2.
Round 2.
Playing Bach Arte Fugue and Vijay Iyer's Time, Place, Action, which has him on the piano, Brentano on the strings, kind of that meeting point between improvisation and composition and what we've seen so much of this whole festival.
Exactly.
And then tomorrow night, we're going to close it out with the world premiere of Courtney Bryan's Yet Unheard, Helga Davis as a soloist, and a text by Sharon Strange. And at 10:30 p.m. tonight, we're going to have the libretto, the poet, and the composer here for an interview, and we'll let you know all about that and have much more details on what we're going to hear tomorrow. As you can hear behind me, there's the orchestra is getting on stage, the people are filing in, and we're about to hear George Lewis's opera, Afterword. What can you tell us about this opera?
Well, again, for those of you who didn't hear the talk that just happened, George Lewis is a longtime member of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, a revolutionary collective formed in Chicago in 1965. And he's also written the definitive book about that group, A Power Stronger Than Itself. And so for the first 600 some odd pages of this book, it is a very, very scholarly and at the same time eminently readable history, ethnography, musical graphic study of the AACM and the impact that it had in Chicago and further beyond. But then at the very end of the book, George gets fanciful and lyrical, and in the afterword, he sort of distills themes that he's introduced throughout the book and renders them in a more poetic and a more whimsical and more creative kind of way. And so this, as you're about to hear, is an opera literally based on the afterword from his history of the AACM. So the characters that you're going to... I need to correct myself, because as we just heard, they are not characters, so to speak. They are avatars of actual living, breathing people, some of whom are walking among us at this particular festival. And so we're going to hear the West Coast premiere of George Lewis's opera, and it is a full-blown opera. You can probably hear the vocalist warming up behind me. The lawn here is filled to hear this premiere. The Libbey Bowl is filling up, and I just think the atmosphere is kind of electrically charged on this beautiful, cool evening.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about this opera being programmed this year is it feels in a lot of ways that this year is centered around the AACM. We've seen pieces already programmed by the composers. George Lewis's piece that was on the lawn earlier on yesterday.
Right.
Anthony Braxton's piece done earlier on the lawn today.
Right.
We're seeing on Sunday them playing on stage the trio. Is that correct?
That's correct. George Lewis performing with the two AACM founding members that he just spoke with. Muhal Richard Abrams, a formidable and gifted and multidimensional pianist, composer, and band leader. And then Roscoe Mitchell, who is a master of the entire woodwind arsenal and points beyond. He's one of the founding members of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, which in a very real way, I think you could say, was sort of the flagship band of the AACM. I mean, the AACM was based around Muhal Richard Abrams' experimental band, and that's where they all came together and worked originally. But the Art Ensemble of Chicago, when those musicians found one another, they moved to Paris and recorded, I think it must be something like a dozen albums just in the space of 1969 alone. The embrace that the French people, and especially the French sort of hipster element, had for African-American jazz musicians had caused many of them to relocate over there, whether temporarily or in some cases permanently. So the Art Ensemble was a band that established itself in Paris first, but in so doing sort of established the viability and seriousness of the AACM on a global scale, so that when they came back as conquering heroes, and they've gone on to remain a force to be reckoned with in Chicago, and also they're strong in New York, and there are various sort of factions all over. And now that we've been 50 years of AACM, there are many generations of those players, and we're going to hear another of them tomorrow when Nicole Mitchell performs the Daybreak concert tomorrow. That's another younger generation of the AACM.
Absolutely, and with this whole programming this year, we're not only seeing the next generation of the AACM, but also just a whole generation of composers and performers who are profoundly influenced by the AACM. You know, of course, our director, being one of them.
That's correct.
But just all of them. And I think what's cool about seeing this opera is we're going to see kind of like the birth, and then we are going to see the ripples around this whole festival.
Right, and Vijay spoke at length actually yesterday in one of the Ojai Talks off campus. He spoke at length about how one of the formative things in his early career as an improvising pianist in the Bay Area was that there was a community there called Asian Improv, where it was about Asian American jazz improvisers banding together and sort of boosting one another's work and providing a sense of solidarity, companionship, economic freedom. And that Asian improv community was very much based on the AACM template. And then, it wasn't very long before Vijay was working with George Lewis and has been working with George Lewis, since his college days in the Bay Area. So again, we're talking about relationships that have extended for a decade or more now.
Yeah, and one thing they mentioned on stage is this idea of no labels, no categorization.
Right.
And perhaps that is the theme of this whole festival. Vijay saying he'd rather have the word genre replaced with the word community.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing that these various communities are not in conflict, they're not mutually exclusive, they're kind of infinitely permeable, we're finding out, and we're seeing really, really, what might have been thought of as radical once, but really, really easy consolidation of improvising musicians and people who are very much conservatory trained to read from scores. And we've seen so-called classical musicians who are improvising on the spot and doing so with eloquence and fluidity and confidence, which is a really remarkable thing. And then we've also, I thought about this afternoon after Tyshawn Sorey's set, because Tyshawn is somebody who's known to most of the world, to whom he's known, as a jazz drummer. And he's certainly a tremendous force as an improvising creative percussionist. But as we heard this afternoon with his double trio, which was a conventional standard jazz trio of bass, drums, and piano, with a chamber music string trio of violin, viola, and cello added, and the way that those musics permeated each other, and the way one moment it sounded for all the world like it might have been Alban Berg, and then another moment it was very obviously improvised, but the way that those two kinds of ideas permeated each other was so compelling, and it kind of proves, the thesis of Vijay's direction here.
Yes, and at the intermission between this performance, we're going to have Vijay here.
That's correct.
For an interview, and he'll be able to talk more all about this and about this year's programming and his whole vision, which is awesome.
That's right.
So
if you're following us on Twitter, by the way, we are accepting questions for Vijay
please,
that way.
give us those questions.
I'm full of questions for Vijay, but I'd love to have you participating as well.
Yes, and after the opera, we're going to have interviews with Courtney Bryan for tomorrow's premiere. And then tonight, we have the late night performance, 10:30 p.m.
10:30 p.m.
or 11 p.m. with Jennifer Coe.
Jennifer Coe and her Bach and Beyond program, where she pairs Bach's Partita in D minor with a number of other pieces that sort of speak to and engage themes or echo sounds of Bach, maybe not literally, but thematically, spiritually. So pieces by Luciano Berio, by Missy Mazzoli, and by Esa-Pekka Salonen, all on that program. A solid 1 hour of solo violin, and you will absolutely be riveted, I promise.
And including probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest work for solo violin, Bach Chaconne in D minor.
That's correct.
It looks like the artists are backstage, the singers are getting ready to go, and the orchestra is on stage. We're going to take you down to the stage, and please enjoy George Lewis's opera, Afterword.
town, join the Union Army. They killed my grandmother Lloyd. There he got all the property. He said, I got documents. Ain't nobody gonna get our land. Black folks did not issue ultimatums to white folks in Mississippi. We had to get out. We had to get out. My father had a college degree. Wasn't worth 10 cents for a black man in Mississippi. He was a poor reporter. Everybody knew their place. My grandfather always grew his own food. He still was never worked for nobody. We were philosophers. That was our philosophy. We made our own caskets. Happy in our world, the white fountain, the black fountain. We came together when fires broke out. Everybody knew their place. sandwiches with salt and molasses and the butter, sausages for everybody. They gave us the whole bladder, blow it up like a balloon. You never heard of that? Had a whale with a bucket. Took a bath in a big old great tub. Had a radio when Joe Louis was fighting. People stood outside our window to listen. The church had heaven and a hell parties. Ice cream was heaven. Chili was hell. Stories about Lazarus, maybe in the was at Easter, I always had a backcourt. I knew my place. Down south they're known for mojo. If they don't like you, they call to one of those doctors fixing people. They call it, I will fix ya. I thought I was fixed. The doctor gave me a little packet. It got me unfixed. I no longer knew my place. We walked into Woolworths. The TV man shouted. Here they come. They have no dresses. They have no suits. We have a day we've been waiting for you. Spitting on you. Spitting on you. We just sat there with no grace. This was a different time. On a big holiday, if you were give you a meal, help you along your way. On the west side, mother, father, sister and brother, uncle and grandmother and grandfather, all in one little room. When people came so, they had rings on. It's cold. They said it was paradise. Uncle Buck didn't have train fare, popped a crate, got to Chicago. It was war, cockroach hands. It had to the wall. You kill cockroaches, but on the way. Horses in the alley, vegetable man, rag man, junk man, fruit man, iceman, coal man, Cats coming through the alley, looking for boys. Insurance cat, laundry cat, numbers cat, put $1 on the 367. All the nice wood and coal, time for a bath. Get that pot, heat that water, pour it in the bathtub, make yourself at home. Coal stove went out. Icebox disappeared. Gas stove came in. Apartment no better. Played on pots and buckets, pass the hat. The police came. To thinking people say at first. They didn't feel it. I did. Peewees, bombers, strange people, blood running out of their arms. A church boy doing it. Please the violin. Get on the bus, go to work every morning, picking pockets, self-employment. Talent counts. Be glad you're black.
Yes.
Being black is hip. Otherwise, you'll be square. Such a fighting line, or go downtown, sit at the lunch counter. Grandfather worked at the stockyards. 43 years found that in the toilet. If you're trying to find a certain Negro in Chicago, stand on the corner of 47th and South Park. You're bound to see him. Isn't coming. It's a long way home. so cold. The cemetery gate is open. Maybe I can cut through. Richard! What a place to meet. Indeed. We haven't seen each other in a long time. That's right, brother. It's so long ago. I've been thinking. You're always thinking. These are jam sessions. Oh. 24 hours a day. Right by the end. Start off a room. Hear the cats playing. Don't go to work, that's dead. The music was overwhelming. Yes. Like stepping into paradise. We looked up one day. All that was snatched away. We had been robbed. We were nothing. No less. Too much noise down there. Cleaned it up. Wiped it away. We're giving you Negroes more power. More education, more money, more money. So let's take your culture. No place to play the music in our hearts. What is we are under tight control, like the great musicians of the past. You know some cats, you know some cats. Let's get together. at the postcards for our agenda.
Now we've been here.
Number one is original music.
That's interesting.
Only?
This will have to be voted on.
I think so.
Damn right.
We thought of all the things we are, what everybody would like to do. We thought of furthering creative music. We've all been talking about it, so get to what you really feel.
Yeah, do that.
We're laying a foundation for something that will be permanent.
Yes, yes.
What point are we on now?
So creative music.
Creative musicians.
I think that's us.
Right.
We are creative musicians, gathered here to form an association to realize our dreams. This is the highest purpose. We're all denied the privilege of expressing what is in us.
Well, I feel you on that.
This involves a great deal of sacrifice.
Yes, yes it
I
does.
don't want to sacrifice for any standard music. But for the concert, only creative music. She creates her own.
Okay.
He creates his own, and everything is created.
Using that word a lot.
I may not get to play my own music. A time will come when that originality must be sacrificed. You don't have to compromise with anyone but yourself. The Duke told us there are two types of music, good and bad. Original music, that's not my mood all the time.
The awful music is already being presented. Record companies, disc jockeys, everyone is quoting it.
It's time for musicians to let go of the others and start finding themselves, stretch out as far as they can. Most people here do want to play their own music. They don't get a chance. Someone else is in control. All of us would gladly play original music. But is that all we would allow? That would not make us free. We will be slaves to original music.
Great choice of words.
This association cannot enslave us, but it can free us to contribute something new. Do people even know what original music is? I don't.
No, I kind of don't either.
Originality, originate, origin, dark source, original compositions, originating from ourselves.
This is an
I think I see it now. The system we're locked up with now in this society. It's what we learned. As we learn more about the systems around the world, we found how much higher level than we had been led to believe. Original means some just musicians getting closer to the music our ancestors played, finding a complete new system that expresses us. We will be locked up in this system for the rest of our days, unless we find ourselves as a people. We're gonna take a vote right now. All in favor of sing our song. Presenting our own music, signify by saying association of dedicated creative artists. But I wonder, could it be put in another way? It said record a meeting for the advancement of creative music. That sounded good. Association for the advancement of creative music. What initials would that give? A is 1, M is 4, C is 3, M and C make 7. 2 is a 1 apiece. That makes 9. We will be the as you can go. What are we calling it? Creative music or musicians? We cannot create music. Somebody else can take it and use it. We've been advancing creative music. No one has been advancing us to advance.
That was just absolutely extraordinary. I have to say, I got shivers at both the unlikeliness and just the sheer magnificence of this sort of blown up mythology, the AACM coming to life on stage here at the Ojai Festival. And I'm here tonight with the man who's made it all possible, Vijay Iyer, this year's
How's it going?
music director. How are you? It's good to see you again.
I'm doing great.
That really was just extraordinary, and I have to imagine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have to imagine that you're probably exulting in all of this right about now. It's just magnificent.
It's a pretty wonderful moment in my life. There's no denying it. It's really a lot of different threads from my whole history, my family, my dearest friends, my closest associates, my most important mentors, my biggest heroes. They're all here.
Right.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in shock myself. But we pulled it together very carefully over a couple of years. And,
Right. Well, take me back to the beginning then. Just describe to me what it was like when Tom Morris first said, "Hey, I've got this idea for you. What do you think?"
It took me a while to wrap my head around it, and that was in early 2015 when he approached me, and he laid a bunch of brochures and PDFs on me, and basically showing me the extent of what has happened here in the past. And then I saw that, and I thought he was definitely crazy for asking me to step in.
Right.
And then he made sure that I was able to come out for the festival that year, which was Steve Schick's year,
That's
2015.
Right.
And so that I got to have a big gulp of it. I was here for almost the entire time. I saw almost everything. I saw all the different venues and got to know a lot of the musicians, of course, but also a lot of the audience and
Right.
a lot of the patrons and people in the organization. So we all, I think, it was good for us all to meet each other, and for me to see what's at stake, but also where an opening might reveal itself.
Right.
So it's, but by then we'd already started to talk about, for example, this opera,
Okay.
which was just hatching, actually, because it was in May of 2015 that they did a sort of performance of a fragment of it at Roulette in New York. I
Right.
don't know if you were around at the time.
Right. No, not at the moment.
And that, so I came to a rehearsal and checked out what was happening. But of course, George has been one of my greatest teachers and heroes and very close friends since
Going back a lot of years to the Bay Area.
Yeah, I met him in 1994.
94.
And then in 1995, he helped me create my own doctoral program, and he also played on my first album.
On your first album?
That
Also
year.
95?
Also 95.
That's right.
And then in 2005, our kids were born. My
Right.
daughter and his son, they're 2 months apart, and it's so it's really like family. And even before that, in 2004, he married a very close friend of mine, Mia Masaoka.
Right.
So, and now we're kind of in league together in various ways. I was on sabbatical from Harvard this year, and he was a visiting professor there, and he used my office. So we were sharing like books and
Right.
audio equipment and everything. So it's very, and I'm just saying all that because I've gotten to witness a lot of things that he's been a part of, and,
Right.
and these massive projects of his as a kind of intellectual originator of certain lines of research in improvisation. There's a field now that he basically almost single-handedly inaugurated called critical improvisation studies, and he just recently edited a 2-volume compendium of articles about
Right.
that. He, wrote this book.
This
about
extraordinary book.
A Power Stronger Than Itself. I mean, I witnessed the sort of beginnings of that.
Right.
Saw
Right.
him kind of struggling with the format. Like he had, like he said, 100 interviews. So how do you tell the story? Basically dignify all the participants' individual stories, and also be able to tell a larger historical narrative.
Right. Well, I remember even just among appreciative fans, the anticipation for the book grew kind of mythic in scale. It was almost like we couldn't wait for it to come out, and we began to become skeptical. Is it going to come out? And then when it finally appeared, it just turned out to be this majestic tome and eminently readable.
It is. Well, he's a little self-effacing about it, but it's a really important work of scholarship.
Right.
It's also great storytelling.
That's exactly.
About all these. I mean, in some cases, it's the most that's ever been written about some of these people, some of these artists, and then of course the Afterword, which is this wonderful chorusing of all these. These direct quotes from the actual artists, and that's what we're hearing a lot of today.
It's really just, it's a marvelous thing. You made a joke, or at least I think it was a joke yesterday, that you kept putting out proposals like this, just waiting for Tom to finally say no, and he never really did. So walk me a little more about how the entire picture took shape and what you were aiming to illustrate and put on in front of people.
I'm not sure that I had any kind of. It's not that a grand plan preceded all the work. It's more that a certain order emerged as we kept working. And it's like, well, for me, it was just like, well, so-and-so is a great artist. Have you checked out his or her work? And Tom would be like, who? Muhal what? How do you spell that?
Right.
And, so as he did the research, I was basically just hipping him to a lot of stuff that was already in the world and quite renowned.
Right.
So it wasn't. It's more that, I guess, what was revealed in that process was that even though he knows a lot of music, I mean, Tom's been around in the classical world since 70s, and he's been. He's very close friends with a lot of composers, a lot of performers, and he's been.
He's run the Boston Symphony and the Cleveland Orchestra.
Yeah, so he's he's knowledgeable, is sort of putting it mildly. He's kind of a wealth of experience in the field of music. But then as he began to realize his own, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think it's unfair to put it this way. Like, we all have sort of limitations in what we're able to see. And this is a man
we have our blind spots.
Yeah, and this is a man who's had a whole life in music, and then he's realizing that there are like multiple worlds that he has never had any access to.
Exactly.
So I think it was in that process that a certain spectrum of possibilities revealed itself and became not just possible but necessary.
Well, and something that has been repeated in a number of different formats surrounding this festival, it's been repeated a few times, and yet it bears repeating again now for people who are hearing us live for the first time, is that you're proposing that we do away with the term genre, and that being a sort of limiting thing like this is jazz, this is classical, this is Carnatic music, and never shall they meet or intermingle, replacing that with the notion of community. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that idea a little bit more.
That's become my tagline now. It might follow me.
You're going to get a tattoo before we're gone, actually.
I mean, all I'm trying to say is that, certainly that there's one piece of it, which is that musical genre as we knew it in the 20th century was a fiction created in the 20th century to guide the process of selling records.
That's exactly.
So there's not really much more to it than that. So I guess it was kind of a divide and conquer strategy. You know? And each of these so-called genres has a certain system attached to it. So, I move around a lot in the jazz business. That's probably the best way to put it, which is like I play often at jazz festivals and at jazz clubs, and they'll often review my recordings or performances in jazz magazines. Mm-hmm. Meaning magazines that have the word jazz in their title or something like that.
Jazz is, jazz was, jazz don't.
Jazz times. And I'm not, I'm not here to disparage that, but it's a system that has its inherent limitations because it blinds people and deafens people, not to be ableist, but I mean, basically it withdraws access to certain other areas of information.
Sure.
And all of that is the work of people in power. It's basically about sharing privilege or failing to do so.
Right.
So, I mean, when we talk about the classical music field or genre or even community, we're talking about a field that has basically historically willfully excluded artists of color, including, composers who wrote operas and symphonies and chamber music.
Right.
Including most of the people we've met today,
Well, that's very much on my mind, because it wasn't more than a few weeks ago that I saw a concert in New York City by the AACM Ensemble that included Muhal as a performer in a piano trio with conventional string players from the classical world, and the premiere of a new concerto by Roscoe. And I just thought, why isn't this happening everywhere all the time?
Exactly.
And you have created here, I think, I'm not going to say you've created a fantasy, but you've certainly erected a kind of utopian vision of what we could be striving for. And I just wondered, how do we move beyond this festival and make these kind of ideas apply in the rest of the world? I mean, that's a big task, but
You mean I haven't worked hard enough yet?
what's your takeaway from this? How do we continue this momentum?
Well, it's not up to me alone, but I hope that we've started to reveal over even just this day and a half
Right.
how we're all in this together. It's really that simple. It's just about whether you choose to accept that and embrace it and do something with it. That's really... But like I said, I mean, these different systems that have been in place that are attached to so-called genres are kind of, I mean, basically they are set up to exclude. So we kind of have to, everybody has to be involved. I mean, it's kind of like, I guess the analogy is or not even an analogy, it's a direct correlate, or kind of, it's the same phenomenon, which is affirmative action, right? And it's one thing to be tokenistic and say, well, this guy's pretty good for an Asian American, or something. It's more, it has to be more like what I find as a faculty member, when I sit on committees or when there's like a hiring process going on or something, is that, well, you actually have to reach out and get to people so that they know that this is even there.
Right.
You have to be proactive.
Sure.
Basically.
Sure.
And it has to happen at the highest levels, and it has to be the first priority and the second priority and the third priority and the 4th through 10th priorities. Like, you have to really just make that the main reason for doing the work. Like, you have to be sure that you're really reaching and finding the most interesting, the most important, the best art that you can find. And that, I mean, if you care about that, then you just have to put it into practice. And it has to be something you think about all day and work on all day. That's basically it.
Well, and it seems like another thread to at least some of the programming that is at hand during this festival, certainly in the piece by Courtney Bryan and Sharon Strange, but also touched upon by your concerto Trouble, is that the music itself can and perhaps should partake of our contemporary world, and that, I think, is also not necessarily a commonly held view within the world of art music, where like art pieces, symphonies and concerti are things that sort of exist above and beyond the mundane world. I don't know, am I sort of spinning off into thin air here, or is there something to this?
I mean, I think in a way the privilege to ignore what's happening in the world is just that. It's a privilege, so sometimes it's sort of like you're never, if you're an artist, then you're always creating in relation to the world around you, somehow. Like that's in a way a truism. Is just sort of a banal thing to say. It's obvious, but what you see, when even what the story that's told in Act 1, where you hear about people's histories and ancestries and the kinds of struggles they went through, even to people living on the south side of Chicago with no heat.
Right.
I mean, in one of the coldest cities in America.
Exactly.
And the basic requirements to survive can't be taken for granted. When you're in that sort of position, structural position, and you choose to make art, that's already a powerful choice, but it's also going to it's going to reveal that reality and address it and maybe push back against it.
Right.
So I think what you're seeing here is a history of the Black radical imagination.
Right.
And it's a history that then, what's kind of I've been sort of tripping about as we watch this opera is that it's an opera about a history of an organization that leads to its own existence. I mean, meaning like the opera is foretold, the existence of the opera is foretold in the premise of the opera.
Right,
In the sense that
right.
they're creating a world or a stream of possibility that then half a century later results in this piece of music. It's kind of like this MC Escher kind of thing, or it's
Yeah.
like a time loop or something. So I think there's something just important about what that is symbolizing,
Yeah.
and George and all of them made this point in the panel. You guys were streaming the panel too.
Yes.
That there was it wasn't just about coming together under a common cause. It was actually asserting a kind of mobility and strength that was not otherwise afforded to them, and basically that the majoritarian systems of power would withhold
Right.
from them. So that's kind of, it just it reveals all these like shadow histories of music that we've kind of been ignoring.
This is it's an extraordinary event. It's a genuine thrill to see it on stage. Thank you for bringing it to us and to the Ojai Festival. And I think we're about to go back down to the stage now. So
Thanks for hosting this great stream and live tweeting and all
Congratulations.
the work you're doing.
Congratulations on the extraordinary premieres, and we're going back down to the stage right now. Thanks, and stay tuned.
Enjoy.
some mall in Leicester on the way downtown. Bring me a sandwich! Ain't got time to shake your hand. Walked in an auditorium. Stop playing piano. Leo cleaning the office. Anthony sweeping. Ariae proceeded to the desk of the rook. She told him she was going to learn his theories on notation. Get your own thing. You don't need someone else's. We're not dealing with style, we're dealing with music. You play your very own concert, playing now's the time. They snatch you right off the stage. Where's your music? Get yourself some music. This concert's over. Get some style. Star walks in. You people are really cleaning up. We're pretty individuals. Not in a family line. We can take anything, make anything out of it. Anthony came down with his contrabass clarinet. Rock had his bass sax. Fonny and Ariae sing and play piano. Man, your head is nappier than mine. Where's that big horn you got? Watch what you say. Claudine's copying everything. Better be cool. Gonna tell on yourself. You had a blonde wig. I don't anymore. Started the day facing the east. What's the faith here? Is it Islamic? That was for purposes. The planet rotates to the east. When you face the east, you're standing boldly. Life fades out of the east into the west. It returns to the east. It returns home. It shows us each day what we are here to do. Among many other explanations, there could be quite a few. Africa is a mixture of a lot of things. What's important is that a physical homecoming. What a miracle! I've been happy all day, painting, writing, composing, playing, poetry, totally involved in art. Black scientist
ancient heritage.
My purpose is to create my own music, to the music of our heritage. Why can't I play the Harlem blues? Can't I play what I feel? There is no limitation unless you feel that a purpose itself is limited. The purpose of this association is to play original music. Those who cannot go along, we're not asking you to stay.
The people are not expecting to hear anything familiar. We are trying to awaken the psyche. Where does heritage come from? The psyche was awakened through the vibrations in the air, eternal, beyond intuition, emotion, and sense.
A good ballad puts everyone on familiar ground. After that, I might be ready for something foreign. Everyone is not as hip as you are. I don't care how we play or what we play. We are extracting thoughts that are already there. My purpose is to play original music. If this will not stand, I will have to step out. This music has been going on since the beginning. It is almost impossible for a young jazz musician.
We're not really jazz musicians.
It is almost impossible for a young musician to play if you had no knowledge of your history. A tree without roots has no foundation. We are in the midst of a revolution. It's time for some new music. I have no concern about how you are going to feel. I'm concerned with how I feel.
play in public. You could just play by yourself. As big as the universe, we play to draw people of like mind. This music has a lot to do with disrupting any status quo or system. To awaken the psyche. There are people in the audience who hear what you hear. They can't describe it. When you do it, hear it. Oh, the music of the past leaves us to create new sounds. Our musical heritage is with us all the time. To worry. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn. was finally doing what he wanted to do. Christopher. I met Christopher when he came out of the army. He wasn't no normal piano player. He was a He got sick. I took him to the hospital. I asked, when did he want me to pick him up? He said, don't worry about it. I don't think I'll be coming home. He was going to India to study with his teacher. When he came into his room, his mother said, Christopher was gone. To both of them in the same year. Something died in me. I didn't want to play anymore. After Charles and Christopher died, there was an exodus. We got to pick up the beat. We are tired. out. We've got to get out. Every day, patients wandering around. We were like patients too. Ils sont loin, ils sont débarqués. Création. Paris was 24 hours a day, like the south side of all. People from around the world, even from Africa. Ils sont morts des nouvelles textes de la nouvelle musique. Retour sur place, austère et alerte, painted faces, masks of terror. What our music means. representing history, ancient to the future. A continuum with Africa. Our music is composed, improvised, difficult, like your lives. We told them, we want you to invent a whole new way of thinking. Heroes, gods, and masters do not exist in our sight. At times they only saw our blackness. Human meanings often went unheard. Perhaps I could be successful as an unusual, exotic item. Like a Venus Hottentot. They are black revolution, terrorists, subversives. Different customs, different foods. I couldn't speak the language. It wears on you. But I was not convinced that it was time to go. Then one day, on the radio, they called us revolutionaries. The police came. Got to thinking. What do we really want to do? We were young and open to explore a whole lot more of the world to see. And we liked being American Negroes. What about New York? What about the world? Let's go.
This brother told me you musicians should use black names. 100 years from now, people will think Duke Ellington was white. You need a name from Africa. I made up my name, Acharamu. It means a drummer. Their names had no love, only power. We named ourselves to chart our future. A sister told me, you're a singer, you're equal, a woman who sings
started calling me Iku. Everyone was calling me Iku, except my mother. She went, I'm not calling you no equal. Somebody told me Ajaramu is a hard name to remember. That don't make no difference. If they love you, they'll remember it. 1,000 years from today, no telling what kind of people will be here. If there are people here at all, they ain't gonna care. Was he black or white? We've been together for half a century in Paris, New York, and the world. Everything was fast, everything was on when we came along. We would drop a silence bigger than a building. What could they say? Give me another drink. We were a glitch, a mutation. So much sacrifice, so many things taken away from us. We're still segregated here, even as a global community is within our path. Get back music, brought us into existence to stand up for ourselves. Our great blackness is our real power. We are here as change. Change is synonymous to any conception of deity. I changed my name. It means number one. Those who survived the cotton fields of death
idea at first how long it takes to come into your own. Survival by any means necessary. The idea of an all-black organization has a great deal of vitality. When you are struggling to create an identity, you cast down your buckets where you are. You build up your strength. But the road that you take must not be a direct reaction to the brutality that has been placed upon you. You're acting in defense against injustice. If you become a perpetrator of injustice, you join your enemy against yourself. We come from somewhere greater than all of us. We were never concerned with how it was going to happen. Innovation cannot be stopped from getting to its rightful place. Nothing can go wrong because there's nothing to compare it with. Faith and strength give us the power to easily slip into another world. Stop trying to be like others. Follow the thoughts of who you are. Part of the power that's stronger than yourself.